Hey!
Tech Conception, episode 3.
Yeah, episode 3.
In today's episode, Odie, what are we going to discuss?
Yeah, we want to look at what are the top programming languages to learn,
In
right?
what year?
In what year? Okay, in 2023. I don't know why we are insisting on specifying the year, knowing fully well that our recommendations are not going to change in 2024, right? So,
Because I want it to be search optimized.
okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Uh,
So let me use my marketing voice. In this episode 3, Odie and I are going to discuss the top 3 programming languages for 2023
mm,
and the reasoning why we put the programming language in number 3, number 2, and you got to hold on to the end of this what broadcast to understand or learn what my number 1 programming language is for 2023 and why it's so impactful, and what Odie's is, in which you'll be pleasantly surprised how much we disagree.
I think that's the main crux of the show, right? Is how much we disagree. But I think it's a good thing because there are always people on both sides of the fence, and having these conversations out, it's really important to get some perspective on both sides. So yeah, I think it's a good thing.
Okay. All right. So let me approach the podium and let me provide my dissertation, aka context, before I list number 3 and number 2. And then at the end, I'll list number 1, and the same thing for you. You're number 3, you're number 2, and then at the end, you're number 1. So, with that said, my number 3 would be no, before I even say number 3, let's discuss some of the reasoning, the factors for what would be or why a language would be in the top 3.
Okay.
So, Odie, my reasoning for a top tier programming language for 2003 would factor in a number of things. Things such as money, aka
Mhm.
earning power, community
Okay.
slash ecosystem, politics, because you know what politics is all about.
Yeah.
It's the struggle to secure scarce resources, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the last factor, if I could think of one off the top of my head, would be the long-term uh, reward based on the investment of learning such a programming language. So those are the factors, those are the reasonings for my top 3 programming languages to learn in 2023. All right. So coming in at number 3, my number 3 for the programming language to learn in 2023 would be Kotlin. Okay.
Kotlin. Interesting. Hmm. So, why Kotlin?
Now, disclaimer, I've never programmed in Kotlin.
Okay.
However, I hear great things about it. All right. The reasoning for Kotlin is it's a modern programming language that has a low probability of being deprecated within the next 5 years.
Hmm.
When we take into consideration how fast technology moves and how quickly languages can be popular or the frameworks of those languages can be popular. We're just taking that into consideration. So with Kotlin, it it leverages the Java ecosystem. It sits on top of the, I don't even know what you call the, what's it called, the Java runtime? What,
Yeah, the JVM.
the JVM, the Java Virtual Machine, right? It sits on top of the Java Virtual Machine. In theory, you have well, not even in theory. Facts are you have access to the Java libraries and frameworks. So
Okay.
the infrastructure is already there. The battle tested infrastructure is already there. And now instead of writing Java and writing a whole bunch of conditional statements to get your code right, you write more terse information dense syntax in Kotlin. It's object oriented, but also has some functional programming attributes to it.
Mhm.
And that is what's attractive for my number three programming language to learn in 2023.
Interesting. So is this the point where I push back?
Sure.
Because yeah, I have
This is the
some.
point where you expose me and say, well, Scott, you admitted that you never programmed in it, so you probably never considered blah, 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 blah.
Funny enough, that's not even the angle I'm looking at it from, right? Truth be told, I'm also a Kotlin. I'm a Kotlin evangelist, if there's anything like that. Like I really like the language; it's a good language. But here's the problem. The problem is Kotlin as a language, right, is at this moment in time narrowed down to the Android ecosystem. Now there are a lot of developers that use it to do JVM and Java projects, but more often than not, the same problem Kotlin has is kind of the same problem that FSharp has, in the sense that most people who know FSharp and Kotlin already know C Sharp and Java. And that's just what it is. So if you are someone who is going into programming, you want to learn how to write programs, you want to start getting jobs, making good money, etc., etc., right? Starting to learn Kotlin, or even F sharp, right, is going to be difficult because you are there is some what's the word? I think F sharp is even to a lesser extent, but there is some overhead in trying to learn the language without knowing the underlying, without knowing about the other language, because the libraries you're going to use are going to be written in that other language. The libraries you're going to use are written in that language. The conversation is going to be about it. Most of the jobs that you want in that field is going to be on that language. In fact, a good example of this was the reason I did C sharp wasn't because I liked C sharp a lot. It was because I was doing VB6 at the time. And by the time we moved to .NET, most of the documentation were written in C sharp. So it ended up being a case of I was forced to learn C sharp because the entire ecosystem was built around C sharp, right? Even though Microsoft will sit on their throne and say that, oh, VB is supported, we still support VB to this day. But anybody who looks at the ecosystem in an objective sense, right, knows that if you're playing on .NET, you want to go C sharp. Now, do I like that? Of course not, but it is what it is. That's how I feel. Like, think about it. If you want to work for a company that uses .NET, 99% of the time, right, they are writing in C sharp. So if you're a new developer trying to get into this ecosystem, trying to get into .NET as a whole, you have to have C sharp knowledge. Now, if you're an experienced developer already, if you have the knowledge of C sharp, then F sharp is absolutely fantastic. And in fact, it's what I would recommend for anybody who is senior. But for someone who is starting out brand new, that is a major friction. So,
I would argue that you are sabotaging yourself learning C sharp first with the intent on learning F sharp second. You have to, speaking from experience, throw 85% of everything you knew about object-oriented programming and its use with C sharp when learning a functional programming language. If you Because you're going to be influenced by that single paradigm
Hmm.
to do things the C sharp way. And it's going to get you in a lot of trouble and it's going to slow down your growth.
I agree, but at the same time, understand where I'm coming from, right? So, what I'm saying is that if you are starting out as a developer and you want to learn a language, I think, just focusing now on Kotlin in particular, because let's look at Kotlin and Java, right? I've written Kotlin, I've done a lot of work in Kotlin, so I can see the differences very clearly. The issue with Kotlin is this: Kotlin as a language was designed to write better JVM code, right? The problem with that is that most JVM libraries, uh, uh, um, most JVM code, even the JVM paradigm and understanding, is built around the way Java does this thing. So I can give you an example. Generics in Java, right, doesn't really exist. Like runtime generics doesn't really exist. What exists in Java is compile time generics. Now, because Kotlin wanted to have runtime generics, they made a lot of tweaks and hurdles that you have to cross in the language because it's trying to be built on top of the JVM, and the JVM already has a particular understanding of how this thing should be. I don't know if that makes any sense. So you will find yourself, if you decided to learn Kotlin right out of the gate, you've not learned any language, you just jump into Kotlin. What you quickly realize is that there is going to be so many hand waving that they are going to do to you that you're going to be like, why is this thing this way, or this doesn't make any sense. Why is this that way or that way or something like that. So that's
Point
how I
taken.
see it. Hmm.
Number two,
Okay.
Clojure. Now, I did spend, well, what, maybe 4 months learning Clojure.
Hmm.
I even had a mentor in Eastern Europe. His name is Sergey or Sergey. I
Sergey.
don't. Sergey. Is that how
Yeah.
you pronounce it?
Yes, Sergey.
Yeah. So I had a mentor named Sergey over in Eastern Europe, and he was kind enough to donate an hour every weekend to help me understand the
Hmm.
Clojure language, and it was very alien to me. There, even with a F-sharp background, it was very different
Yep.
for composing programs. However, the reason why I think it's number two
Okay.
is because, and this is something that maybe I'll introduce as a factor, is I sincerely believe you pick your language, you pick your community. Okay.
Mm.
So, like, we happen to both speak English. Maybe you speak more languages than I do, IDK. But it's the mere fact that we're speaking in the same language that we're able to share ideas, that we can
Correct.
discuss paradigms, approaches, or solutions, and we can join our thoughts and trade ideas
Hmm.
based on the commonality or the understanding of something that we believe is applicable, which is a shared language.
Hmm.
With Clojure, every not that I've met all 500 Clojure developers, but I would argue that with Clojure, I have been impressed with each developer that I have come across, whether it's on a Twitch stream or really most of it has been on the Twitch stream
Mm.
because I don't think I've ever met a Clojure developer like in person.
Okay.
But they all seem to be very sharp. And, with all three of the languages that I've selected as the
Mm.
top three, it's a 99.99% probability that the developers that program in that language also program or can program in other languages.
Yes, that's
All
correct.
right.
Hmm.
I've never heard of a Haskell developer that only knows Haskell. All right.
Yeah,
I am aware of Java developers that only know Java or C Sharp
true.
developers that only know C Sharp.
True.
And so with languages such as Clojure,
Hmm.
you tend to attract a certain breed of developer that is willing to take their time outside of work to invest in their curiosity and to improve the way that they craft solutions.
But don't you think that that's a side effect of Clojure being a niche language? Don't you think it's a side effect of that? That in the sense that if we could wave a magic wand and and all developers learned Clojure and all developers started writing in Clojure, right? I would make the argument that you would get the same craziness that you currently see. Now, it will be a lot harder to do or a lot harder to pull off, but you will get this watering down, if you will, of the core ideas of what Clojure is, because people would write Clojure in the laziest way possible, right? See, you can't eliminate lazy developers. Lazy developers will exist
Do
regardless of.
you, if I may,
Mhm.
what do you know about Clojure?
I know it's a Lisp derivative, right? So
Yeah.
it uses the same Lisp syntax and so on and so forth.
So my top three programming languages, what they all
Hmm.
have in common is they have greater constraints than your antiquated programming languages such as C Sharp, Java, etc. They they encourage, if
Hmm.
they're not functional first, they are functional, in which
Hmm.
they constrain you to write syntax or code in a
Hmm.
way that reduces the likelihood of certain errors that common object-oriented programmers uh, tend to run into much more.
So I agree with you, but I think we are looking at it from two different perspectives here. Because on one hand, you have the guardrails of the language, right? There are the things that the language doesn't allow you to do at a guarded level. But then there are also people who surely find a way of abusing it. That's just how it is. I can tell you this because maybe towards the end, by the time we discuss that, I'll get into more detail, but I can tell you for a fact that if you've done enough code reviews, right, you start to respect or you start to fear the ability for developers to write bad code. Developers will jump through hoops, right, to to write really bad code, right? Or they could write code in such a way that even with the best intentions, even with the cleanest of language, right, you pull your hair out. Because, and in fact, I would even argue that it's even worse because imagine if I gave you simple tools that can only be used one way, right? And then you go out of your way to twist that tool and use it in a really, really bad way because you have an expectation coming in to do the code review that, oh, these tools are used in this particular kinds of ways and this is how it's supposed to be done, and then you see somebody's code base where the person is trying to manipulate it, it will drive you insane because it's actively fighting against all the safe checks that you had in your mind when reviewing that code, right?
That's applicable to all languages.
I agree, but my point here is that there is nothing stopping a bad developer from writing bad code in any language. I don't care what the language is. They can surely do it in Haskell, or they can write code in such a way that it is so mangled that you can't make sense of it, right? I,
I would argue with those languages and the type of people that those languages attract,
Mhm.
it's a less percentage,
No, but the argument I'm making is this: is that, like you just rightly said,
the
the
lower percentage, should I say.
yeah, yeah, the kind of people that those languages attract. But my argument is, if those languages explode in popularity, then that thing you liked about that language will be lost. Because now the percentage of people who actually know what they're doing would
Yep,
be a lot less.
I get it.
Mm,
That's a valid argument.
yeah.
Hence the evolution of languages and paradigms.
True.
Okay.
All right. So,
All right. So those were my first two.
mhm.
Your turn. What's your number three? What's your number two?
All right. So, my number three, believe it or not, as crazy as it's going to sound, is C Sharp or Java. And I'll tell you why. I don't like these languages that much. C Sharp is not so bad, you know. Compared to Java, C Sharp is not that bad. C Sharp is quite good actually compared to Java. Java is, ugh. But the reason I put them together is that they are kind of similar in a lot of ways. And the main reason I put it in my list is because if you are new and you are starting out, sometimes it's not about how good a language is, it's the entire ecosystem you have to look at, right? What IDEs do you have at your disposal? What, how do those IDEs help you? Okay. Now, Java is, I would say it's a terrible, Java is bad, but it's not that terrible. And one of the reasons why Java is kind of decent is because it has a lot of powerful tooling around it. So one of the complaints that we have with something like Java is that if you're writing properties in a class, you have to do the whole get this, set this, and all that craziness, and it's just disgusting. And better languages like C Sharp, and co already have, nicer ways of doing it, aka properties. But as bad as Java is, because that's a serious pain point in writing Java programs, one of the things they've started doing is using something called an annotation processor, which allows them to essentially use an annotation to simulate the behavior of automated properties in .NET and C Sharp and all that good stuff. So these are things that newcomers, people who are learning for the very first time, are going to find very, very helpful in the sense that it's not just about how good your language is, it's what's the tooling around the language, what's the tutorial system, as in how much information is out there around the language. If I have a niche Java problem and I go to Stack Overflow, I'll probably see 500 of that particular question. But if I have a niche problem in Clojure, there's a good chance that I may not find a good answer, right, to that kind of question. These are things I think about when picking the third spot. The same thing also goes with C Sharp as well. C Sharp and Java are just like two sides of the same coin. The second reason too is also opportunities, right? There are many companies, there are many there are many companies that have already picked a tribe. They've already either picked C Sharp or Java. Like if you're in the financial industry, for example, or you're in healthcare, or you're in medical, and so on and so forth. Many of these companies have a defined stack that they use internally, right? Now, the exception to this will probably be the big companies. Did you hear the new gist that Fang is now dead? That is now Gamma. You know, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Meta, Apple, something like that. Anyway, so all the big companies, the gamma companies, quote unquote, right? They have all kinds of stacks, so it's not really a big deal to them. But smaller companies, right, have a predefined system. They're either a Java shop or they are a .NET shop, right? And that is very, very important if you're just coming out and you're learning programming and you want to get a job and you want to get hired. You want to have as much opportunities available as possible. That's why C sharp slash Java takes the third spot in my list.
You want to have as many opportunities as possible today, or do you want to position yourself to be in a really good space where you're one of few technical authorities with 3 years or 5 years of experience when the industry evolves or moves forward? That's
But
something that I didn't really touch on with my top three. Is as a beginning developer, sure, you can spend the next, I don't know, 3 months, 6 months learning a programming language and how it's applicable to different areas or different stacks. And then, congratulations, you're a Java developer. You are one out of 100 and I don't know, 20 million Java developers. Yeah, they get paid more than C sharp developers, but you are in a big ocean of people that have a very similar skill set when it comes to knowing how to program in that particular syntax.
So,
Or hold on. Or you can position yourself instead of choosing a more than 2 decade old antiquated language that even your grandmother had the opportunity to learn, right? It's so old that you could say, you know what, strategically, I'm going to position myself to learn a modern language so that even though I'm a beginner and I'm going to grow my skills, I would prefer to be a senior in this language in which, in theory, I could be the technical authority in the state of, I don't know, Florida or the state of Hawaii, whatever, in which I am the go-to person 3 years from now because the number, yes, there's still going to be legacy systems written in these archaic or antiquated languages, but I like being productive and I like, I don't know, being an outlier. And so that's more political and more strategic. And I know you have a rebuttal for that.
so my rebuttal to all this is you mentioned something very, very important, but it was a very subtle thing, and I was able to pick it, which is that Java developers get paid more than C sharp developers, right? But
Mhm.
Java developers are more than C sharp developers. Why do you think that is?
Java developers are more than
Yes,
C sharp
there are
developers.
more Java developers than C sharp developers, yet Java
Well,
developers are paid more than C sharp developers.
well, I think the reason why there's more is because Java was marketed as an open source language, and many people interpret open source as free,
Hmm.
easier to basically get that language and apply it towards a space where even though C sharp is I think C sharp is open source, it wasn't marketed that way, and so it doesn't have the same type of effect. And so when people think about .NET, especially people that are older,
Hmm.
they most people believe that if you're going to adopt the .NET ecosystem to produce solutions,
Hmm.
that it's going to be expensive with licensing. How much does SQL Server cost? How much does I don't know. I can't think of another vendor technology that's within the .NET
Yeah,
ecosystem.
Windows
But
Server, for example, back in the
yeah,
day. Mm.
yeah. So they think about the upfront costs in order to start building things, and or you can go to the PHP, Java, or other open source options.
Hmm.
And I'm not aware of any really upfront costs except for learning, right? I don't think there's a financial cost.
Hmm.
MySQL, I don't think MySQL costs
Yeah,
money.
it's free.
Yeah, so that's my understanding, but you could correct me.
So you're right, but it's half of the reason of the question I asked, right? So you're right in the sense that because it was marketed as open source, that is true. But that also meant that there are a lot of companies that went down the Java route, right? Many of the legacy systems are built with Java. Many of their core applications are built in Java. And if you've ever led any team before, especially in a corporate environment, you will know that changing languages is probably the hardest thing that can be done in a company because you don't want you want such changes can only happen if they are organic, right? If a good swath of the developers in the company already like, say, language B, are already moving to language B anyway, there's the only time you can actually convince them to That's the only time it will actually make sense to be able to convince them to move from language A to language B. But more often than not, that's not happening. And the reason it's not happening is because you want everybody to speak the same language so that everybody can work together. You don't, even the person who is bringing the suggestion of language B needs to go on leave at some point, right? That person may need to go on vacation, that person may not be around, etc., etc. And you don't want that to affect business continuity and everything. So you find out that most companies, right, tend to be more and more conservative as they grow, right, around whatever technology they started with. So
Right. So,
yeah, so the point I'm getting at is that Java developers are paid more because even though there are so many Java developers out there, but the number of systems that are already written in Java is even larger, and there is still growing demand for those developers. That's why they are paid more, right? And that still goes back to what I said earlier with the whole C sharp and Java thing is that granted those languages are not hip or whatever, but the fact is that there are many companies that use those technologies internally, and as far as they are concerned, a programmer is a programmer. So if they need to hire 50 Java developers to get something done, they are going to hire 50 Java developers. It doesn't matter if those individual developers are also happen to be Kotlin experts or also happen to be Clojure experts as well. So
it's
yeah.
unlikely. So here's something interesting that you mentioned is you said something to the likes of needing to maintain your development
Hmm.
team or development teams,
Yeah.
and it's double-sided, right?
Hmm.
I think you were speaking from the reference point of an established organization or a mature
Mm,
organization, and another consideration would be a startup.
okay, fair
Now,
enough.
what's important to a startup, I think, is establishing your culture of how you so of how you deliver solutions,
Hmm.
which includes the stack of technologies.
Mm,
Um, if you hire the 1% or 0.01% of developers that are enthusiastic about Scala or Clojure or Haskell, and let's assume that they're more productive in those modern languages compared to the antiquated languages that other developers program in.
hmm.
And let's assume that those developers on the startup that are using these modern languages that have the, in your words, guardrails, so that they can be less concerned about things that could go wrong that are common in your antiquated languages, who are they likely to refer? They're probably likely to refer people that are like them,
Hmm.
that share their interests in whatever language, modern language that is. And I say all this because it's a factor in building a culture that that leadership wants or
Mm,
envisions. Whereas with a mature, established organization that may not be known for adapting to change as quickly as a startup, they're doing well, they're getting money, but how hard is it for them to motivate and adapt
mm,
compared to your startups that are hungrier and faster to test and respond, right? And so there's levels to this. There's several factors to it, but it's just a consideration. Okay, you're number two,
yeah.
unless you want to respond to what I just said.
No, no, no. It's pretty spot on. Yeah. My number two is drumroll please. Python.
Say it one more time.
Python. Yes.
Okay.
So for me, Python is a clear number two because Python is this language that is I will call it the Goldilocks language in a way, in the sense that it is very rare for a language to have all three things: mainstream appeal, good fundamentals, and also very, very versatile, right? Those three are very, very difficult to come around in a language. Either the language has good fundamentals, mainstream appeal, but it's very, very niche. It's not really versatile, right? You can't really use it to do many things. It's just focused on one specific thing. Or it's versatile and it's very, very mainstream, but it doesn't have good fundamentals, aka PHP, right? So, but Python is almost in the middle in a very good sense, in the sense that unlike other dynamic languages, right, it has very good, very strong, um, it has very strong guardrails compared to other dynamic languages. It also happened to be very easy to learn, right? So Python as a language is almost, it is a seriously watered down version of Java, right? From a beginner's perspective, you don't need to learn much to know how to do Python. And then what makes Python even more crazy is the fact that it's the language of machine learning, it's the language of a lot of things. So it is very, very versatile in the sense that if you learn Python, there are so many trendy areas you can go into, right? You won't make games, obviously. That one is out of the question. You're not going to make anything like games and so on and so forth. But if it's just building web applications, building desktop applications, even for startups, there are a lot of startups that like Python because of the quick prototyping nature, right? But would I recommend Python for a serious company? No, of course not. To me, that's a your core system shouldn't be built in something as flimsy as a dynamic language. And I know I'm going to get.
YouTube is built in it.
I no you so
Oh,
no,
oh.
no, hold on, hold on. So YouTube's front end may be built in it, but I can bet you that many of their backend services are not written in Python. That I can tell you. You know, of course, their machine learning stack will be built on Python. Right, that one, because that's what Python is mostly used for. They could have used Java to write it, but truth is, if you're doing anything machine learning, you have to use Python. And Python is good enough that it's a good web programming language. It's better than PHP. It's better than Ruby, right? And for me, that's a really, really high bar. And it has some core tenets going for it. So because I know this because my sister wanted to go into software engineering and so on and so forth. So she went and did CS50, right? And CS50 they teach them C, which is ugh. So after learning C, they now teach them Python. And but the moment she saw Python for the first time, she was completely blown away. Like she was very, very impressed because as a language is something that a beginner can really, really pick up very, very easily. Now, why is it above C Sharp and Java? The reason it's above C Sharp and Java is that if you're a beginner, you want to learn C Sharp and Java, there's so much history behind both languages that you may never, you know, like it will take you a very long time before you finally understand everything about the language. But with Python, the language is very, very, the scope of the language is very, very small. The things you need to learn to become a productive Python developer is actually very small compared to C Sharp and Java, right? So that's why for me it's a strong number two because it has the mass appeal, it has the abundance of jobs, it has the good fundamentals, right? With very decent guardrails and stuff like that. It has a lot going for it. So I would say Python as number two language to learn, influential language to learn in 2023.
Python is only applicable for the back end.
Yes,
Okay. Well, that's a
yes.
point. That's a point taken away.
Uh, so okay, I see where you're
It's
going with
fine.
it.
I mean, it's a trade-off.
Yes, but so here's the thing with Python as a language, right? The concepts you will learn in Python, right, translate easily to other languages as well. But it translates easily to other languages. But if you want to go from zero to developer, I can't find a shorter, a shorter, more pleasant path between not knowing anything about programming and learning Python. Like that road is so fast and so quick that it makes the most sense for it to be my number two. And the only reason it's not number one is because of the number one that
So
we're going
my
to
number
mention.
three and my number two,
Uh-huh.
you can use the same language on front and back. Yours, you can't, especially with your Python. So, ha. Okay. So that was your
Hmm.
number two.
Yes, that was my number two.
All right. Briefly, is there anything that we want to recap on before I discuss my number one, your rebuttal, and then you discuss your number one with my rebuttal?
Um, I think that there should be some consideration as well that, these lists aren't like the end all be all. And
They
se
are the end all be all. You have to learn. You have to pick either my top three or Odie's top three. That's it.
but it also depends on where you are in your journey, in your career, right? If you're still starting out, you probably want to go with mine. But if you are already like familiar with programming concepts, you already know a little bit about programming, then I think your own top three is more applicable in that case.
I understand your reasoning. I just have a difference of opinion
Okay.
because look, life on this earth is limited. We don't got
Hmm.
time to waste. Do you really want to learn a 20-year-old language that everybody else knows, that you're going to be competing during massive layoffs to try to get a job when there's so many other people that know it? Or do you want to work with a forward-leaning organization that's not relying on antiquated technologies that, in theory, I understand startups need to get it done, but in theory, uses technologies that address the challenges of the previous generation languages.
But
Which one's really more attractive? The
no,
language that builds on top of the inefficiencies of the previous generations, or do you want to be part of mainstream and say, no, I want to compete with all these other people, and I want to just be mainstream. I don't want to be an outlier. Or you could just learn this language, and in 24 months or 3 years, maybe it'll be more mainstream. Because Python was a hipster language 20 years ago.
true.
Python did not have
Hmm.
there was Python, and then there was another language,
Ruby.
Perl, that came out
Yeah.
like around the same time,
Okay.
and they both were kind of hipster languages. Maybe Perl not so much, but Python really did not, in my opinion, become a force multiplier when it came to like adoption.
Hmm.
That probably doesn't belong in the same sentence. Probably within the last, I would say, 8 to 10 years, it blew up. For
True.
10 years, yeah, Python, okay. But once machine learning started taking off, Python took off.
No, I would argue that Python
Okay.
had actually taken off long before machine learning. And I remember this because frameworks like Django were very, very popular long before machine learning was a thing, right? And in fact, if you have to remember, Python partly became very, very popular after the creator started working at Google, and then Google was pushing Python heavily. So yeah,
Okay.
yeah, Python was slowly gaining popularity. The way I like to think of Python is Python was like a snowball. It literally grew like a snowball. It started very little, then started gathering momentum. The momentum has been like increasing, you know. So do you have any honorable mentions before we go to number one?
I think I reasoned for my top two, or my number three and my number two, for political reasons, political
Mm,
factors,
mm,
because it's important. Like, it's one thing to learn a language because you want a job. It's another thing to learn a language because you want to be relevant um, 3 years from now. That's
I see your point, but for me, right, is this is how I see it anyway. You can't know the future, right? We can only guess what is going to be relevant 3 years from now, 5 years from now, whatever. My argument is you have to get the ball rolling, right? And even though some of these languages you refer to are mainstream, popular languages that people
antiquated.
antiquated languages and all of that, and you're right, but also remember that the because of the momentum of those languages already, right? The market share of those languages, there are far more opportunities for you to get a job and fail at that job and get the ball rolling. That's how I see it because
If you're if you are competitive
mhm,
and it's not enough for you to be a team player, you actually like being better than other people and you like demonstrating it
mhm,
based on skill,
mhm.
then adopt a modern language. Real talk, this is my arrogance speaking, but I think there's facts, right? Is and you don't have to admit it, but I think that you probably share the same opinion, right? For
Cor-
yourself.
correct.
I didn't even say it yet.
Yeah, I know where you're going to with this.
Real talk, I am usually I'm usually the most productive developer at a shop that I join, and I work as a contractor,
Mm,
right? When I help organizations, I usually write code faster. My code is more understandable, and my code just happens to be testable. Like it comes my code comes with tests that makes me an outlier, right? And the reason why I say this is because the F# language that I adopted,
mm,
it catapulted me in front of my competition. I'm able to think in ways or paradigms that my competition is limited in. They can't think the way that I think because they haven't trained in the methodology or the philosophies of the language that I've been trained in,
mm,
right? And I know that sounds really arrogant, but it's
mm.
fine because I like I like being better than people that I compete with. And you may think that it's not a competition until layoffs come. I'm just
True,
saying.
true, true. Okay, so here's my so
I'm an
this
architect and I write better code than the majority of people that I try to help out. All right. So, and I'm not supposed to be writing code.
I
Yeah.
get that, but also you have to also consider that think about how much time it took you to just learn,
2 decades.
yeah, exactly. So for someone who is starting new, who doesn't have 2 decades, right, to quickly ramp up and level up, right, diving in at some of these languages is not necessarily the best. Now,
Yeah,
to to
but let
to
me
ag-
let me just pause.
okay,
It
okay,
wasn't just 2 decades.
hmm
It was personal practice. It was I'm going to learn F#. Let me go to the code katas website that's agnostic about a language and let me perform these code katas. Oh, I can't do this kata. I don't understand how to do this. Stack Overflow. You know what? I'm going to subscribe to F# topics or questions and answers in Stack Overflow. That's going to be my morning briefing, like I'm the president. Every morning I'm going to get briefed on questions and answers on F#, right? So it wasn't, oh, I've been programming for 20 years. It's my lifestyle,
mm,
right?
yeah.
An hour in the morning, an hour in the evening is applied to learning this language so I can increase my hourly rate. Right? So I'm sorry for cutting you off, but what were you about to say?
No. What I was about to say is like I agree with you, right? So my approach personally is to like look at the languages I love. The languages I love are languages like F sharp. I'm even looking at Rust now. Kotlin is a very good language. But the reason I pick these languages is because number one is I already have experience developing software, so I'm not looking for new experience. But secondly, and more importantly, is that those languages are force multipliers for me. One of the reasons I picked F sharp in particular was because I started learning about functional programming paradigms in high school and so on. And I was like, how can I take these interesting things and apply it to the work I was doing? My daytime job was doing .NET, and there was this language F sharp right where I, expected it to be. And even the applications I built with F sharp, right, is like I'm able to do times 5, times 10 the amount of work, right? Given the same amount of effort, I wake up, I work for 3 hours, and the output I'm getting is orders of magnitude. That makes sense for me, right? Because I am already experienced. One, two is that I want to also have my own company, build my own software, and like you said, with a startup, I don't have the luxury of hiring 20 mediocre C sharp engineers, right? So I have to be very, very judicial about what tools I need to be able to know that if I hire just three developers in a particular language, we're able to get a lot done. And so from that perspective, it makes sense. Your perspective makes sense. But I'm looking at it from going back in time, right? To getting that feeling of being new, right? Not even knowing how to program, not even knowing, getting a clue of, what languages to use and so on and so forth. If someone were to tell me, hey, okay, you don't know anything about coding, you don't know anything about software engineering, but we need to get you into Facebook, right? What is the shortest distance between those 2 points? Well, the shortest distance, in my opinion, are these three I mentioned, right? Either you learn C sharp and Java and become a as good as you possibly can, and then you are now playing the odds of how many C sharp jobs are available, how many Java jobs are available, right? Versus how many Java engineers that there are. And up until this point, right, that has always been the number of jobs, or the amount of demand for those developers has always been more, which is why more mediocre people are entering into those program into those ecosystems and learning those languages. But from my perspective, right, if I want to use the minimum amount of effort to get to where I want to be, you are either learning either C sharp or Java. You are either learning Python, right? Python in particular is so powerful from that perspective. Now, you can't do front end, I get that, but from a I don't know anything to I'm being hired, right? Python gives you the easiest path between them, because the amount of concepts you need to learn are not that many, and even the concepts themselves are written in such a way that they are just like plain English, right? So it's easy to grasp compared to having to manage having to figure out object-oriented hierarchies and abstractions and interface, and knowing where to use an abstract class versus an interface and all those craziness. Python doesn't have any of that, so that's something to remember. And so,
Got it.
yeah, so from my perspective, right, if I'm to give honorable mentions, right, well, the number one honorable mention would be, um,
No, no, no. I have to say it because I went
okay,
first.
okay, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. What are the honorable mentions? Like two other languages that you think would have entered this list?
Oh, I thought you wanted me to mention the number one programming language.
No, no,
My
no, no,
pick.
no, not yet. Just honorable mentions. Like, you know,
Honorable mentions would be, for me, I would say Elixir
okay.
for scaling backends.
Hmm. That's about it.
Haskell
Haskell. Okay.
Haskell for being extremely opinionated and borderline holding you at gunpoint to write things what it perceives as the right way
Hmm.
without side effects, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Haskell and Elixir are honorable mentions. If you notice, everything that and I'll include Python. Yeah,
Okay.
but if you notice, everything that all the languages that are in my list, even if they're not officially in my list,
Hmm.
they're modern and progressive.
Mm.
They're
Interesting.
not like yours, old and handicapped. So,
Yeah. For me, my own honorable mentions would be, um, I wanted to say Scala, but
I
Yeah,
tried learning that. I didn't
yeah,
appreciate it.
yeah. I would know.
Even Dottie, I tried. It it didn't click.
Damn, that's crazy. Honorable mentions, programming languages. Um, I would say, I would say Elm. Elm is a really good language, right? Elm is a very solid language, especially if you're just focusing on front end,
I
right?
forgot all about that. Yeah.
Elm is really good.
I have an Elm repository called Decasa that's public on my
Yeah,
repo.
yeah. I think I remember. So Elm is there. Then honorable mentions. I would say um you know what? I could just throw in
Ruby?
yeah, I'll throw in Ruby, right? Ruby was really good. The things that knocks Ruby down the list, because I remember learning Ruby in 2014 or 2015. Oh my God, I was such a Ruby fan back then. But one of the things that knocked Ruby down, right, was that Ruby was slow. Oh my God, it was slow. And secondly, um, most, yeah, Ruby. I'll say Ruby, Ruby Elm, and maybe Elixir. Those are the those will be my honorable mentions. Yeah. So, what's your number one language to learn in 2023?
Oh, I think I've you and I both sprinkled it in our discussion so many times that I think the audience knows my language. It's let's praise it, right? Let's let's send a prayer. Thank you, Don Syme, for giving me another day to use this marvelous creation of yours. I am so thankful for what you have provisioned me.
Mhm.
And so I tried to share the gospel of your works for anybody that's willing to listen. In the name of Tomas Petricek, Don Syme, and who's uh who's that famous book,
Which one?
uh the best book for for learning F sharp.
Uh, ex- Expert F
Who,
sharp.
no.
Which one?
What's the dude's name? In
Oh,
England, I had him on my.
oh, Isaac Abraham, right?
No,
No.
yes, he's one, but no, who's the speaker that really makes things simple? Real,
Oh,
real,
I remember.
yeah.
Scott Wlaschin.
Scott Blashin.
Yes, yes.
So, in the name of Tomas Petricek and Scott Blashin, my grace, amen. It's F sharp.
Yeah.
F sharp has revolutionized my thought processes on
Mm,
how I am able to interpret requirements and deliver automated solutions. I actively write compilable specifications in F Sharp to deliver front end and back end solutions in that language. Because of F Sharp, I am a Rockstar developer for the organizations that I try to help. And it is no question that I'm just a better developer in almost every shop, with the exception of maybe a couple shops
mm,
where I knew my place and
hmm,
I was the second best developer, right? But F Sharp really catapulted me in my career. The 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 great contributors, Tomas Petricek, Scott Wlaschin, Isaac has helped me out on my questions.
mhm,
Um, it really, like, real talk, it has given me a quality of life.
mm,
Like the toys in my garage, my lifestyle in Miami, like F Sharp has contributed massively to my lifestyle.
yeah,
And I don't think a lot of people consider how a language, let alone a programming language, can be a force multiplier in how someone can earn their living,
hmm,
right? Earn their lifestyle.
hmm.
F Sharp, I really appreciate what it's done for me. Real talk.
Man, this your number one pick is going to be difficult for me to critique because it's going to be really difficult for me to critique because let's be honest, right? The same thing applies to me as well. Um, I was a software engineer at a C Sharp .NET shop. I had built quite a few systems with C Sharp and .NET to the point where I was already starting to get worn out. I was starting to get burnt out with the kind of things I was seeing in C Sharp, the kind of problems we were trying to solve. I even remember vividly there was a time we had to create a DSL for like marking students, school, whatever, for the application we were building. And at the time, I remember vividly that I had no way of knowing how to write a DSL. It was something that was just, it felt like this was the height of my abilities, and writing a DSL or a custom language was just here on top of that. So I remember vividly that the way we were able to walk around it somehow was we would carry a expression tree, a C sharp expression tree, serialize the expression tree, and store it in the database, which was disastrous. Which I won't go into the reasons why that is bad, but you know that was because there was this chasm between the tools I knew and what I was trying to do, and I couldn't like cover that gap, right? And the very first tutorial I watched on F Sharp was here's how to write your own parser in F Sharp. That was the hello world of F Sharp in my mind. It completely blew me away. Completely. And yeah, like you said, I was earning, you know, I remember how much I was earning. I was earning peanuts essentially to be writing C Sharp, and I got my first gig because of F Sharp. So exactly what you said, applies to me too. I got my first gig because of F Sharp. At the time, it was a part-time project. But can you imagine? I was working 40% of the company, and I was making more than the C sharp company I was staying in Nigeria. I was working 40%. That's during the weekends for this company, and I was making more than what I was than my day job, right? And so it's very difficult for me to critique F sharp, but I'll try. It's very difficult for me to critique F sharp because I can genuinely say this language has helped me in my career immensely. It's not even close. Like there's no second language in my opinion. Anyway, so with that aside, one of the reasons I wouldn't push F sharp to like new developers, like I said earlier, is that it's the current problem it has, right? The problem of F sharp falls into one category. F sharp as a language is epic, excellent language. It's not even, I'm not even going to argue that or debate that. But the open source ecosystem is struggling. It's struggling for two reasons. It's struggling because Microsoft has this thing but doesn't have it at the same time, right? F Sharp belongs to Microsoft, but Microsoft doesn't. Microsoft F Sharp is like the abandoned stepchild of Microsoft, right? Technically, someone else can't come and become the parent of F Sharp because Microsoft owns the patents to F Sharp. But at the same time, Microsoft isn't willing to push F Sharp the way JetBrains is pushing Kotlin, for example, right? Because Kotlin has a similar situation. Kotlin belongs to JetBrains. But the beauty of Kotlin was that JetBrains was able to push Kotlin to the point where Google, right, put their full weight behind Kotlin. And that was what motivated a lot of the Java developers or Java Android people to move towards Kotlin to the point now that almost nobody is writing Java Android anymore, right? Part of the problem with the Java Android situation is because Oracle tried to sue Google over Java. So Google has had it in mind that we need to get off Java as quickly as possible. So when Kotlin was presented to them as, oh, we can work with you to push this language, see where Kotlin is today. Microsoft doesn't have that incentive to push Java the way to push F sharp the way Kotlin is being pushed and so on and so forth. And because of that, you have a situation where there is this chicken and egg problem. Companies don't want to adopt F sharp because they don't see that many F sharp developers. And developers don't really want to learn F sharp because there aren't that many F sharp opportunities, which is just sad. And is one of the reasons why, I really, it got to a point I was so upset with it that I decided, you know what, I have to be the change I want to see. And by God's grace, the startup that we're trying to build is all F sharp. That's all we use, right? And I think the more and more businesses act like me, right? Or act like us, starting companies that are looking for F sharp developers, that hire F sharp developers, creating F sharp opportunities that grows the community. It will get to a point where Microsoft will have no other choice but to F sharp the stage that it deserves. But you know, why does someone who is still new, who is trying to learn how to program, go straight to F sharp, knowing fully well that most of the libraries or frameworks the person will try to use are probably C sharp frameworks, whether it's Entity Framework or Akka.net. But I would argue that of recent there are a lot of like F sharp libraries for common C sharp library, so it won't be as bad. Not to mention the fact that you have the whole. Anyway, I'll get into that later. But the point I'm getting at here is that as someone who is learning programming languages in 2023, right? F sharp is excellent as a language, especially if it's your first language, because, like you said, you don't have to now reinvent the wheel, or you don't have to unlearn bad habits that you've learned from C sharp and all of that stuff. You can just go straight to learning what works in F sharp. But the problem there is that you are going to be interfacing with C sharp libraries, you're going to be using parts of the C sharp ecosystem, and that's going to really, really affect you when you are learning, because at some point in your learning F sharp journey, you now have to learn the C sharp equivalent. So, say for example, you want to write an F sharp application and you're using a deserializer like Newtonsoft.json or whatever. Guess what? The what they call it, the documentation on Newtonsoft.json is pure C sharp, right? So these
Yeah,
are.
and it's approachable. So here's and then we got to move on to your number one.
Mhm.
It it's straightforward based on my experience of interrupting with C sharp from F sharp.
Okay.
You just have to take into consideration the C sharp classes that implement iDisposable. You need to make sure that in F sharp you actually use the new keyword syntax
Mhm.
when you are working with iDisposable instances.
Mhm.
And the biggest mind bender that I struggled with when interrupting with C sharp from F sharp syntax was async await. I mean, it
Mm.
was, yeah, async await. So
Mm.
in F sharp, you have your async construct, but in order to interrupt with C sharp, you need to learn what let bang is, what return bang is, what match bang is,
Mm.
and you need to always remember that when you're interrupting with C sharp, you need to use async.await task. You need to pipe your result into a async.await task, and that took me a while to understand all
I think that
those
has
that
that
policy.
that has been eliminated in, I think, F sharp 4.1 or so. There is now a task computation expression now, so you don't even need that piping to async task and all of that stuff anymore. You can
Okay, maybe
just
you
use
could
your lead
show
bank.
me later.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I can show you. Yeah, there is now because of what you rightly said, right? It's one of the reasons why it was introduced back into F sharp, where they realize that there are a lot of people who want to pick up F sharp, but that whole interrupting with task becomes very, very complex. So the F sharp team actually went ahead and built a task computation expression so that you can just use let bang on a task, right?
Okay.
So yeah, yeah, that's fair. Now on to my number one, and I know this is
All
going
right.
to. Are you guys ready for fireworks?
Gonna
Uh,
scare you.
my number one is drum rolls, please. TypeScript slash JavaScript. Like, I mean, it speaks
No,
for
you gotta
itself.
pick one. You can't say both.
No, no. Why I said both, right? Because they are usually used in conjunction with each other, right?
Okay.
So you can think of JavaScript as the runtime and TypeScript as the actual compiler. Um, And the reason for this is pretty self-evident. Atwood's law. Anything that can be written in JavaScript will be written in JavaScript. JavaScript is that popular that you have to learn it anyway. It's what it is. Like seriously, if you're building anything web, you have to learn JavaScript anyway. And you can use JavaScript
Mm,
for
Web
yes.
Assembly has a different opinion, but okay.
Fair enough. But the point still stands that, you can use JavaScript for virtually anything you want. Robotics, sure. Web, sure. Front end, mobile apps, JavaScript has you covered. So, whether it's React Native you want to use and so on, JavaScript has you covered. So, from and the thing is, like I said, it's one of those languages that is kind of inevitable in and of itself. You have to learn it sooner or later. So you might as well
I
just
refuse.
yeah, I get that. I get that. But the way I see it is, um, if you are still new and you are starting, right? First of all, everybody wants to be a hipster. So because of it, there are so many JavaScript jobs. It's ridiculous.
So are people writing backends in TypeScript?
Oh, 100%. 110%. In fact, there are people that don't even know that there are that that you could use other languages to write backends. That's how
So
powerful TypeScript slash JavaScript is. Yes,
so
you
is
can.
Node.js is like a backend like framework
Yes,
for JavaScript, right?
it's a
And
backend
so
runtime.
are people using TypeScript to accommodate that?
Of course.
It might sound like a weird
So
question,
so
but
so let me explain it in a way that will be easy for you to grasp, right? Think of JavaScript like the .NET runtime. Sorry, think of
hmm
Node.js as the .NET runtime. Then
well,
think
think
of
of JavaScript as Missile, right?
exactly.
Microsoft Intermediate Language
Then you
before
now
it distills down into bytecode.
yes, and then you can now think of TypeScript as you can compile TypeScript, it spits out JavaScript, and that JavaScript is what you run, right? And the
Yeah.
the reason why I put the two of them together, TypeScript slash JavaScript, is that all valid JavaScript is valid TypeScript, but not all valid TypeScript is valid JavaScript. Does that make sense?
It makes sense.
Yeah. Most so for all intents and purposes, right? We're talking about the same language. Is more akin to C C++, right? You hear people say C C++ a lot. It's more akin to that, but it's even tighter. The integration is even tighter than C C++, right? There are
Uh,
some weird incompatibilities between the two, but yeah. So, but like I said, the reason I picked JavaScript as a number one is like I said, it's almost like a force of nature in programming, meaning
well,
that
you
if
say it's a force of nature, but maybe you're going to lead on to it later. But you didn't pay. Is it pay homage? What's that term?
uh,
Where you
uh,
didn't praise the father of TypeScript.
Oh, my bad. My bad. Thank you, the great Anders. You know, not just the father of TypeScript, he's also the father of C Sharp as well. So, like,
And the father of what else?
of Turbo
No, I thought did he work at Borland Software
Delphi. Yeah, yeah,
or it was Delphi?
yeah.
Okay.
It was Delphi that he worked on.
And
So,
say his name again.
Anders Helsberg,
I don't know
right?
why it sounded like it said Andrew Silva, like UFC.
Wouldn't that be something? Yeah. So, what was I talking about? Um, your video is out. Can you see? I can't see you.
Yeah, it keeps flickering.
Oh, okay.
Anders Heisberg. It sounds Russian.
Halsberg.
Oh,
Yeah,
he's Danish.
he's
Okay.
Danish. Yeah.
I don't almost said Danish. Dania was a country or something. What is that Hungary? What country?
Denmark.
Denmark.
Yeah.
Duh.
People from Denmark are called Danish.
Yo, so Denmark spits out
Yeah.
some
Even
software
even our,
leaders.
our even our friend.
They pumped
Ah.
out David Hannemeyer Heisen or David Hannemeyer Hans. What's his last name?
Yes. DHH. David Hannemeyer Hansen.
They
But there
pumped him
is
out. They Anders
what
Heiberg.
no, what's this
They
our friend's name?
Mark Seaman.
Maximan. Thank you. Ah, I love
Yeah,
Maximan. Yeah,
yeah.
he's
That those Danish engineering, man.
Yeah,
Like
those guys on another
if
level. All right,
I,
I
I don't
agree.
stereotype people, but if I did, I would say that Danish people are really good at engineering software. Yep.
I agree. I
They're
agree.
like the Danish are to engineering software as the Kenyans are to running marathons. Yep. But I don't stereotype people.
Yeah. No, but at some point, if your country keeps producing Michael Jordans, you have to start asking questions, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The Scandinavian countries produce the strong men in
Yeah,
strongman contests.
yeah, and they also produce the best software engineers. Like Linus Torvalds is from Finland for crying out loud. Can you imagine?
Uh,
He came up with Linux while he was at Helsinki University, right? He was in university in Finland, and coming out of university, he wrote Linux. So you're dealing with people who are properly taught, right?
yeah.
Versus some of us who we don't even know what our education system taught us, and most of the
Yeah.
things we know are things based on self-improvement, not necessarily because we were taught. Now imagine how much more ahead we would be if we were actually taught the things that we ended up learning by ourselves.
Yep.
You know?
So I derailed this. Let's get back.
Yeah.
That's my fault.
Yeah. No, no, it's fine. Like, and yeah, TypeScript. So the creator of JavaScript is Brendan Eich. He was a, I think he was a engineer at Netscape. They called him and told him, "We need you to write this language in 10 days." And he was wise enough, and this is the brilliant part of everything, is he was wise enough to uh, 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 make the right sacrifices in the language, right? He didn't he didn't take some of the silly approaches that software engineers were using at the time. So if you look at PHP, for example, PHP PHP as a language mixed both arrays and dictionaries into a single construct. And for me, that is just dumb on so many levels. I can't begin to explain how dumb it is, right? You're mixing something that is you're mixing a data structure that that is a sequential data structure with a random access data structure. Anyway, I don't want this is not a rant
Well,
about
I would
PHP.
argue that Clojure they mix properties with dictionaries.
No, 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 no. You're mixing you don't get what I'm saying. Properties, dictionaries, that's no big deal. I'm talking about lists
Yeah.
themselves, right? So, anyway, um, 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 PHP. So he made the right call in terms of the core things that are important in the language. The language should be flexible. I should be able to patch the language as I see fit. I should be able to patch the standard library, right? He didn't go into the design of the language with the idea that, oh, I'm going to build the best language and everybody is going to love my language and I'm going to build in all the good things into it. Rather, he went from an opposite approach, which is, I'm going to build this bare bones language that will allow people to use the language however they see fit, and then we can come back later and start adding things to the language as as it starts to make sense, right?
He built a language that tens of trillions of dollars rely on.
But that's kind of my point, right? Is that first of all, he didn't set out to build it, but secondly was that because of the way he built it, right? The
He did it in
language,
2 weeks.
yeah, he did it in 2 weeks. The language has evolved on its own, right? So it has evolved because developers are now looking for ways to improve the language and everything. And then it kept happening for a very long time. There was the whole V8 revolution with Google, where Google was able to build their JavaScript engine that compiles JavaScript first, right? Um, they call it had a JIT compiler and all of that stuff. Anyway, long story short is that you now get to this point where JavaScript was starting to boom as a language, but like I told you with the whole Python stuff, people couldn't really use it to build enterprise software because being a dynamic language, it didn't have good type system, it didn't have the right structures around it, libraries and so on and so forth that would allow companies or groups, large groups of people to collaborate on. And that was where Anders came in and introduced TypeScript. I remember it vividly in 2013 because, it's one of the things. It was like 2014 or so, but yeah, thereabout. And yeah, the moment I saw TypeScript, I knew it was a hit because it took all the things that made JavaScript successful, the entire syntax and everything that everybody is familiar with in JavaScript, but cleverly added type annotations and strong typing to it. So it may sound crazy to you, but TypeScript has a stronger type system than C Sharp. The only I think F Sharp's type is very, very close to F Sharp's type system. It falls short quite a bit, but it is just as sophisticated as F Sharp's type system. You still have your some
Discriminant
types,
unions.
yeah, your discriminated union or some types. It still has
They
exhaust,
just
yeah.
they
Hmm?
probably don't have active patterns.
No, no, they don't have active patterns and stuff like that. Come on, we're talking F Sharp here. F Sharp is,
Yeah,
you know, but
which
but
I haven't used in a long time anyway. So
yeah, but it's actually much stronger than C Sharp's type system. So you now get to a point where you have this language that has the mass appeal, that has the because it was open source. It has always been open source. So everybody embraced it. The Java ecosystem embraced it. The Python ecosystem embraced it. The .NET ecosystem embraced it. All the different ecosystems had to embrace it because they had to play on the web, and as a result,
Angular, right?
yeah, the libraries like Angular and so on and so forth. So
Uh,
if you are new, right, JavaScript is the language to learn because by the time you learn HTML, you learn a little bit of CSS, you learn JavaScript, you're already a web designer. You learn Node.js, you are now a web developer. You get what I mean?
and you're in your mid 40s by the time you feel like you're competent enough to actually get paid.
Nah, I don't think it's not that bad. It's not that bad. It's not that
Uh,
bad, really.
all
So,
right, so look,
yeah. So, long story short is, yeah, if I were starting from scratch, if I was a brand new developer and I needed to ramp up quickly, it would be JavaScript. The only thing that I have against JavaScript is that the libraries like React and so on and so forth can be very, very messy. It's not as clean. It has a lot of pitfalls. But with TypeScript as a kind of shell around JavaScript, man, you can get a lot done and you can be very, very productive with it. And it has the good fundamentals in the sense that it has very good guardrails that prevents you from going off the deep end and stuff like that. So, yeah, I would say JavaScript, TypeScript would be my number one pick.
okay, and survey says that I, Scott Nimrod, win the debate. All right, or won the debate. My grammar is off today. Um,
It's fine.
all right, well, I
Yeah.
think I don't know how long we talked for, but
Yeah,
that
an
was
hour,
that was a
30
long time.
minutes.
I think we divulged some some factors into our decisions on why we chose number three, number two, number one
Hmm.
individually. And I think there was some value in this discussion, and I think that people that disagree with my number three, my number two, not my number one, or your number three, your number two, your number one, leave it in the comment and politely say why, right? That would be helpful to help
Yeah.
other people not go down the path that we're leading them to so that they could be productive members of society and earn a living with a starts with an L. What's that word? Lucrative like
Hmm.
job. So that's it. I don't have anything else. Thanks.
Yeah, that's all for me too. So,
All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. Take care. Bye.
bye.